Well, good afternoon, Watauga Christian Church. This is Pastor Adam coming to you from my office where I am here, but I'm not really here today. I hope that you had a good Easter celebration, that you were able to celebrate Resurrection Sunday and make it special, even in this a time of quarantine and time of social isolation. Um, take heart. We will be back together again soon. Just looking at some things today, it seems like there is a good chance that it may be over at the end of April, but I'm not for certain on that yet. So it'll depend on how some things play out in our county and in our state over the next coming weeks. But be in prayer for that this coronavirus would be wrapped up quickly if you haven't already been praying for that, and that we might be able to be back together again soon. Today, I wanted to share with you kind of a little devotional thought and something that I know I think I've talked about on Sunday mornings, even in previous series. But uh, today, I don't know how things are going at your house, how you're holding up under this time of quarantine and social isolation. And I know that we are all anxious probably to get back out, to be able to go do the things we could do. Stores open up, and I know probably for several of you out there, you are very excited to even do such things as go get your hair cut. I know that I'm certainly right there with you on that. I'm way overdue if you couldn't tell. But today, I don't know if maybe you're dealing with a little bit of anxiety or a little bit of frustration over this. And I want to say if you are, that's okay, because I think we're all kind of there right now. But I want to talk about maybe how we could have a peace about it, and some things that the Apostle Paul says, and then also look back at a hymn writer in history and see how they were able to have that peace as well. So I want to go today to 2 Corinthians chapter 12, and I'll read it for you, the portion I want to talk about, and see what the Apostle Paul has to say here. So in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul starts off, he's kind of talking about himself in the previous chapters, and about how he is a very high, I guess you could say, up there Jew, how he has a good pedigree, and how, and then he kind of flips the script a little bit here. We'll talk about that, but he starts off chapter 12 talking about a vision that he had where he was caught up into what he calls the third heaven, and he says whether this was in the body or out of the body, I don't know, but God knows. And he's talking about himself, but he's speaking in the third person. He says, I know that this man, whether apart from the body, I do not know. God knows, was caught up to paradise, and he was able to see things and hear things, and catch a glimpse of God in heaven, and had this vision and this trip, I guess. And he says, but I'm not going to boast in that. He says here in verse 6, he said, even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool. I'd be speaking the truth, but I refrain so that no one will think of me more than is wanted or what I do say. And then he says that God keeps him humble, and that's going to lead into the point I want to talk about today. He says God keeps him humble. He says there in verse 8 or verse 7, excuse me, continuing on. He says, in order to keep me from being conceited, uh, in order to keep me humble, he's saying here, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. He said, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. So we don't know what exactly this is that Paul's dealing with. There's a lot of speculation when he talks about the thorn in his side, and here in other places where, maybe it was a physical problem, or maybe it was a temptation to sin that he has battled with his whole life and couldn't get away from. But either way, the way he talks about it here is it's something that keeps him back, something that is a constant, aggravation to him, a constant torment to him, is the words that he uses. And I got to thinking about it, and I said, we're all kind of dealing with this coronavirus and all of the social distancing and isolation and things getting businesses being closed and livelihoods being messed with and all these things. And Paul says here, he has a thorn in the flesh, and I think we all kind of have that thorn in the flesh right now with this coronavirus. But Paul goes on and he says this. He says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, meaning God said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. He says, therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest in me. He said, that is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, hardships, persecutions, and difficulties. For when I'm weak, then I'm strong. So he's saying, my grace is sufficient for you in this time. So I want to share with you another little thought today that ties in with this. And if you haven't had a chance to check out our Easter special that we recorded last week and posted on Sunday, you can check it out on our YouTube channel, and it's also shared to the Facebook page where you'll be seeing this as well. But in it, we go through some different hymns, and I talk a little bit about the authors and how the hymns came about and kind of some of the history there. But I want to talk about another hymn today, and it's one that we're going to be singing for you on the live stream on Sunday and playing for you. But it's by Horatio Gates Spafford. He was not a preacher. Horatio Spafford was a Presbyterian, and he was a good member of the church, is what he was. He was a successful lawyer in Chicago and a devout Christian. And he had some friends that were evangelists, like Dwight Moody of Moody Bible Institute from Chicago. Spafford was a very successful man. He amassed a great amount of wealth. But in the year of 1871, his fortune pretty well went into the tank after the Great Chicago Fire. He had invested a lot in real estate along the Lake Michigan shoreline, and he lost everything almost overnight when that fire came through. Before that, though, to double down on this, his son, they had a son, and he died unexpectedly right before this financial disaster. And so Spafford, dealing with all of this and all of these trials and setbacks, he decided that he was going to send his family and join with them later on a European getaway. And so what Spafford did was he had some business to attend to there in Chicago, and he sent his family ahead of him on over to Europe to join up with Dwight Moody in a evangelistic campaign. They were going to kind of travel along and help out with that and take some time away to recoup and to relax. But in November of that year, he sent his family on this trip, and they went on the SS Ville du Havre. And on November 22nd, on the transatlantic trip, the Loch Earn, an English vessel, collided with the SS Ville du Havre, and Horatio Spafford, his family was on that ship, and they sunk with the ship. A few days later, Mrs. Spafford cabled back to her husband and said, saved alone. Need further instructions. Spafford left immediately. He joined his wife, and it's said that as he crossed past the point where his 3 daughters died, were drowned in that accident, he put pen to paper and he wrote the words to this hymn. He said, when peace like a river tendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, Whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well, it is well with my soul. Why could Horatio Spafford pen those words when going through a series of such tragedies in his life and losing his children, losing his fortune? I think it's because he knew the truth of what Apostle Paul was writing about. When the Apostle Paul says that God said to him, and God says to us, my grace is sufficient. No matter what we're going through, no matter what trials, no matter what loss we have, God's grace is sufficient for us. Horatio Spafford knew that truth, uh, and we can know that truth today as well. That no matter what this virus brings or doesn't bring, or no matter how, I guess, setback we get in our thoughts and in our lives, we know that God's grace is sufficient. That He can carry us through this. He can carry us through things even worse than this if we just trust in Him. So I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to stay in the Word, to stay in prayer. Pray for our nation. Pray for our leaders. Pray for those who are vulnerable in this time. Look for ways to serve one another, and remember that God's grace is sufficient for you and me, and we'll rest in that today. Thank you. I hope to see you through the screen on Sunday again.